everybody. Welcome to the premiere episode of the Dad Hat Entertainment News and Reviews podcast, where we'll discuss what's new and exciting under the three tentpoles of modern entertainment media: music, movies, and video games. I'm your host, Sean Fontaine, along with musician and songwriter Kristian Montgomery.
What's happening, guys and girls?
And movie aficionado slash business tycoon Derek Lloyd.
Hey, everybody. How's it going?
So here we are, our debut. Looking forward to it. I thought we could start off maybe by giving a little background of ourselves so that, the listeners know kind of what to expect from us and, see where we came from. I guess I'll start. I'm Sean, the owner and creative director of Polyfountain Media, LLC. We work in digital media, specializing in indie video game development. After going to Boston University's Center for Digital Imaging Arts for a little while, I started working as a 3D modeler and technical artist for another indie video game company located in the Boston area. But after I left there, I decided to create my own company so that I could work on bringing my own ideas for games to life, and that's why I created Polyfountain Media. Part of that was also I wanted to help foster and mentor other game development career seekers so they could get a foot in the door, because I knew how hard it was to get a foot in the door into that gaming industry. And actually, a few of my interns have gone on to work for AAA game studios like Tencent and Epic Games. So that's basically my story. Let's skip over to Kristian. Let's hear about you, dude.
Well, I am a singer-songwriter from Boston, Massachusetts, a former Boston Music Award nominee and anti-hero recording artist. Currently working on my next project called the Kristian Montgomery and Winterkill Band. And I am also a labor activist as well as a lobbyist for several court reform groups. And I have been a part of the Boston music scene for the better part of 3 decades. I have recently found the energy and inspiration to also throw my dad hat into doing some musical review as well. I think I've got the resume and the catalog of music in my head that I think I could add a nice addition, I guess, to all of the music review blogs out there coming from my generation's perspective.
Yeah, the first person perspective too.
Yeah, yep.
Being the musician that you are.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Derek, let's hear about you, my friend.
All right. My name's Derek Lloyd. I'll be leading the film review portion of this podcast. In real life, I'm the owner of Battleground Games and Hobbies, which is 3 retail stores that we have in Abington, Norton, and Saugus, Massachusetts. The stores specialize in board games, card games, role-playing games, and miniatures games. So I'm deep into the nerd culture for sure. And,
storytelling.
Storytelling. There we go. We're open 7 days a week at those locations, and that's been sort of a big part of my life since 2002, when I left my former career to open up the store. I've also been a deep level fan of film for my whole life. It's one of my favorite subjects to talk about. So I'm here to share that love of movies with everyone and hopefully have a good discussion with Sean and Kristian. And I do want to drop right here, if we don't mention it later, that I probably am going to get into spoiler territory with the various movies that we choose to review. So I just wanted to drop that warning here that if you care about that kind of thing and you don't want any part of the movie spoiled, I'll do my best, but a lot of what we talk about is probably going to veer into spoiler territory. So be warned.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that from here forward in any of the future episodes that chances are spoilers are going to be dropped in any of these particular genres. So if you want to not be surprised, just keep that in mind. But if you want some deep dives into the reviews and news of these kind of stories, then here's where you're going to want to come. So
Hey, I have to add too that from a film point of view as well, you guys really haven't mentioned your indie film career that that occasionally pops up on the Book of Face.
Yeah,
and that I find to be absolutely awesome. It's I look forward to those.
Yeah, going back to like I think it was probably 1986, Sean, if I'm not mistaken. I got a Panasonic Omni movie camera, which was kind of rare back in those days, and you can tell it's rare because when you watch some of the old videos, every time I point the camera in someone's face, they're like, "Does that pick up sound?" You know, like people have no idea. So hilarious when you lay it up against today, where everyone has a camera that's 5,000 times better in their back pocket. You know, so yeah, we got into some pretty ridiculous filmmaking stuff when we were kids, and it definitely had a huge impact on my life. And at this point, I've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of footage that date back from 1986 onward. Sean was a huge part of that, and some of it we can talk about, some of it we can't.
That's a definite.
Awesome.
So yeah, I'm sure we'll delve into that quagmire of insanity at some point.
Yeah, no doubt.
But
Mr. Brady played a role. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, the fun-loving Brady Bunch. I'm sure that we'll get into that at some point.
Yeah. Hey, was Florence? Remember Florence? Was it Florence Henderson? Was the woman who played Mrs. Brady?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. If you get a chance, I know this is we're straying into unfamiliar territory as to where we were going with this podcast, but make sure you check out the movie Shakes the Clown. It's a Bobcat Goldthwait film, and she plays a cameo in it, and it's absolutely hysterical.
Oh, really? Huh.
Yeah, it's a movie about an alcoholic clown.
Does she play her part as like the Brady Bunch mom, or is she like someone different?
No, she plays Bobcat Goldthwait's one night stand. Her son urinates on Bobcat's head in the bathroom while she's screaming for him to come back to bed. It's hilarious. It
almost sounds like he's stealing from us, Derek.
Yeah.
From one of our episodes of the Brady Bunch.
Yeah.
But we'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
All right. So just briefly, really quick, I want to let people know what's coming up for this episode, for the first episode. In a minute, Kristian's going to talk about Lukas Nelson and Promise of the Real. I actually didn't even know that person existed, Lukas Nelson, until you mentioned it. After that, I'll be going into the release date and trailer and some gameplay discussion of The Last of Us Part 2. And then Derek's going to finish up with his take on Ad Astra, which just came out in theaters not too long ago. So let's see. If we had sponsors, they would go in here right about now. And if you were listening and you were thinking of sponsoring us, we would love to hear from you. We have a nice chunk of time right at the beginning to put you in and tell all about your products or information. We'd love to have you. So, all right. Why don't we get into this with our music discussion? Kristian, you want to lead off?
I would love to. I'll start by saying that, like my parents' generation, I often find myself poo-pooing all of the new music that has been coming out. As a musician myself and having paid my dues at a number of rock clubs and pubs and dirty bars throughout the country and throughout the world, today people can become famous overnight on The Voice or on America's Got Talent. And I'm not saying I feel I have a chip on my shoulder about that, but after having beer bottles thrown at me and the potential for lung cancer from all the smoky bars that I've had to sit into to try to become famous. I find myself sometimes closing myself off to stuff that pops up that and have to have a second look and almost force myself to not be like my parents and say, hey, maybe there is some really legitimate good rock and roll still to come. And that's where I found Lukas Nelson. He is Willie Nelson's son. His guitar playing is phenomenal. So much so that he joined the Promise of the Real as Neil Young's backup band. He was originally Mr. Young's guitar player, and the guy just has a phenomenal feel for the instrument. His sound, it like straddles rock and roll, country, soul, folk, and rhythm and blues. His latest album was in 2018 called Turn Off the News and Build a Garden, which would almost, take away his last name, Nelson, and you'd say, gosh, that sounds like something Willie Nelson would say, But right now he's on his band Promise of the Real is on Fantasy Records. And the kinetic energy that this band has is absolutely amazing. They all seem to share this musical ambition. Like, their live performances are better than their recorded work, which is huge for me. I go to see a band play, not to hear the record. If you want to hear a record, you can go see Journey. Their concerts sound just like the record, which is why I only saw them once. I had no ambition to ever see them again after that because I could just listen to the record at home. But some of the guitar solos and the places that they take the music is absolutely phenomenal. He has his bassist Corey McCormick is and the drummer Anthony Lagerfo. They just connect and they just draw you into this live performance. They bordering on tribal to like psychedelic rock. They just take you places. But one of the things that I really like about this guy, Lukas, is that there's a lot of child prodigies out there, a lot of people who, grew up in the music industry with their parents who were, really well known. I myself, when I was in high school, I dated Joey Kramer from Aerosmith's daughter. Got to see what a rock and roll family life was all about, and got to, he was just as concerned about his daughter and I keeping our clothes on as any other father would be, and just as watchful and just as intimidating. She seemed to grow up like any other kid. It wasn't like, hey, my dad's this rich and famous, amazing guitar player. Like any parent would, you want your kid to do better than you did. And it seems as though Willie Nelson has absolutely no problem letting that happen. And his son is just on pace to, I won't say surpass the master of the craft that Willie Nelson is, but he's going to at least equal his father's status as a cultural icon. And he's very environmentally concerned. He's a lot of his concerts and live material is often taken from like Farm Aid and these festivals that seem geared towards raising money for hunger or for for farmers, for and the environment, which is something that I can completely connect with. One of the songs on my new record is, based on this premise that, maybe we should all go now if we can't fix this problem. Maybe we should just get the crazy man in the White House to just press the button and get it over with because this is ridiculous. And this music just has this collaborative spirit. It's like it's not just about Lukas Nelson. It's about the players he surrounds himself with as well, and how they just engage each other during these live performances. And I'm cheering this kid on. I mean, when it comes to that chip on my shoulder about growing up without having the resources to put out a record myself every year, working 2 or 3 day jobs to try to go to school, and then especially after I started my family, music is it's such an addictive passion, but yet it's so hard to pursue it the way you want to, like the way any artist wants to pursue his dream. You want to be able to put your whole heart into it. And I can tell with this guy that he's not taking it for granted. He loves what he does, and you can just see it in his guitar playing, in his voice, which you'll catch that tiny little hint of his father's voice behind his, almost reminiscent of Julian Lennon and John Lennon. Julian was just that one-hit wonder, but you could hear the ghost of his dad in his voice, and it's such a cool thing to be able to pick out. But I'm really excited to hear about this guy's his upcoming stuff. It seems like he writes like crazy. And one of the other things too about him is he seems to engage not just musicians but also people in the film industry. He was a collaborator with Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper on the 2018 blockbuster film he did called A Star Is Born. He was on he did the soundtrack for that, and he co-wrote and produced a lot of the film's music. He worked closely with Bradley Cooper in crafting Jackson Maine's musical persona. It was kind of like this classic art imitating life movie. He was in Jackson Maine, the character Jackson Maine's backing band, and they won BAFTA award for film music. So I mean, this guy's got some accolades that are starting to accumulate.
Was this his first album?
Yes. Oh, well, turn off the news and build a garden. I don't know if it was I think this is his second full length album. He released one prior, but with him, it's not. I think this Turn Off the News and Build a Garden was like his first album, like where he was the main songwriter. He's worked, he's worked with with Neil Young on some of his stuff.
Sure.
He's been a co-writer with a lot of different artists. Like I said, Lady Gaga and a couple of other people. I'm not a really big fan of Lady Gaga. I mean, she's right out of the music industry. Where they are. I call it the new music industry,
like the pop culture filler kind of thing.
Yeah, there was a great article or a great interview that Frank Zappa did once about when things changed. The music industry used to be run by a bunch of fat old guys, cigar chomping dudes, who would just sit in the office and somebody would come to them and say, "Hey, we got this," and they'd say, "Yeah, just put it out there. Just put it out there and just see what happens," and sometimes nothing would happen, and sometimes they'd sell 10 million units, and they'd be like, "Well, hey, that was worth it." And then one day they brought in a hippie, and they said to the hippie, "Hey, go get us coffee." And he went and got coffee, and they said, "Okay, he's brought our coffee on time for like 10 weeks straight. Let's make him an A&R man." And the next thing you know, people are coming into the office and saying, hey, what do you think about this? And that hippie's saying, well, listen, I know what the kids like these days, and that's not going to work. And so the old cigar chomping guys got set aside, and the new guys came in who told everybody, hey, we know what's hip and happening. And instead of that guy who used to say, let's take a chance, let's see what's new, whatever happens, happen. It's not music isn't a huge, investment money-wise. So, just see what happens. And, something changed. And Lukas is it reminds me of the old days. His music, his playing this music is, let's just see what happens. Maybe the bass player's going to...
When you said that he had the hint of his father's voice, to the untrained ear, which is my ear, like when I first, you told me about him and I started listening to him, I'm like, oh my God, he sounds just like Willie Nelson. And I was like, oh my God, it's just like him reincarnated or something. Listening to him more now, I can tell the nuances and the differences. But the first thing I was like, oh my God, that is definitely Willie Nelson's voice.
Yeah, I had a similar reaction.
Yeah. I guess, as far as vocals are concerned, I can hear his dad. I can hear it in his voice, but it's not his father's voice. It's a close second. Just like I see my grandfather's face in my son's eyes, but it's not him. But it's enough to remind me about him. It's enough for me to go, oh, hey. Gosh, I remember that time my grandfather took me fishing, and now I'm taking my boy fishing.
The similarity was definitely a positive. It was a positive thing for sure. The similarity,
I don't know. I was originally thinking, what if he sounds too much like Willie Nelson? Like that was my initial thought. Like, does he not want to be associated as much with his father as other people would associate him with? Him, unbeknownst to himself.
Well, I don't think. If you look at his appearance, and I bet you if you went into his tour bus and you took a deep breath, he looks like he probably wouldn't be too much unlike his dad. He looks like that farmer screaming, "Get off of my land!" He's got this. Kind of like you could see the same stare his dad has when he gets into his music. You can tell that he's there. He's in that song. He's not thinking about the crowd. He's not thinking about what he's going to do after the show. He's in that song at that moment, just like his father. And I suppose that we'll watch him evolve, and I bet you as he gets older and his voice matures too, it's going to sound, he's still going to have that hint of his dad, but I bet he's going to make it his own. I hear that. I can, he did a performance on the Howard Stern show that they did a cover of a Creedence Clearwater Revival song. And I was just blown away. And if you can catch that performance, he's definitely taking the Nelson product, and it's metamorphosing into his own thing.
My wife's a fan now, definitely. She hadn't heard of him either, and then she heard me researching him, and now she just likes to listen to him all the time. So it's like, you just made a convert.
Nice. Well, a funny story about my wife and my particular music. Now that I'm in the recording studio, my producer, Joe Clapp from Ultrasound Studios, actually in our hometown, guys, in Hanover, he'll send me the MP3 of the song as we're progressing through it at the end of the day, and I'll listen to it on the ride home. I'll listen to it in the car. Like tomorrow night, I'm going to see Ashley Jordan, country artist from Boston, perform in Cambridge. And my wife's already, told me, she's like, yeah, I really can't wait to listen to your new record all the way to Cambridge and home. Because I can't, I'm listening to my own stuff and thinking, okay, here I hear a little bit of violin, here's some piano, here's this and that. And it drives her absolutely up the wall. She's like, how many times are we going to listen to this one particular song? Like, I could listen to it all day. Yeah, I'm sorry if you're not a fan and if it's driving you up a wall.
That's the definition of captive audience right there.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, you can't get away. And, I would never tell my wife to shut off music. That would not, it just wouldn't fly with her. So, I let her listen to what she wants.
Cool. All right. Thanks, man. That was a really good review of, well, not review, but in-depth explanation of Lukas Nelson's up-and-coming rise to stardom. I also want to mention that if anyone's interested, I'm going to put some links to Lukas Nelson's stuff that's on YouTube in the show descriptions in the YouTube and Facebook pages for Dad Hat. So you can check it out. Cool. So anyway, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I think for now we've decided that I will jump into the second segment and talk about the video game Last of Us Part 2. Its release date is actually February 21st, 2020. They just talked about that a couple of weeks ago at the PlayStation State of Play event, and they used it as the finale for the show, which was basically the thing everyone was waiting for to hear what was going on with this game. The developer is Naughty Dog, and the game director Neil Druckmann did a trailer and a sort of Q&A about the game on when they released the trailer a couple weeks ago. The original game came out in 2013 on the PS3, and they did a re-release, a remastered version on the PS4 around 2016. And I have just recently jumped on the bandwagon not too long ago and finished the game maybe like 4 or 5 months ago. So I'm really excited for this game. If anyone's ever played it before, you know that you play as survivors in it's a post-apocalyptic world where there's been a virus, or actually an outbreak of like a fungus that takes over the people and becomes zombie-like. And you play as this man, Joel, who during the initial outbreak, and here's some spoilers if you didn't already play the first game, but he loses his daughter, who's probably 14 years old at the very beginning of the game. And it's just man, you definitely feel it. Very emotional scene right at the very start, in the first 10 minutes of the game. Then it does this time jump where there's 20 years have passed and you are playing as Joel 20 years later. He's living in Boston. He originally started down in the South. I forget what city they were from. But the story basically follows Joel, and he becomes the ward of a child. Her name is Ellie, which this survivor group is trying to ferry from one side of the country to the other to get her to this hospital where they can reverse engineer a cure for this outbreak. And in the midst of this game, he sort of becomes a surrogate father to Ellie, and you really get bonded to this pair as almost like just father and daughter pair by the end of the game. So Last of Us Part 2 begins 5 years after the events of the first game. So you're actually living in Jackson, Wyoming, and you're playing as Ellie now instead of Joel. Ellie's the protagonist. She's kind of settled into herself in a way where she is part of this community. She has a really close friend named Dina, who was in the release trailer a few years ago, which caused a little bit of a stir. But the trailer that just released shows them part of this sort of survivor group that goes out into the wilderness to clear out the area of the infected and, search for supplies, a la, kind of like the Walking Dead kind of scenario. And something happens, when they're out on their mission, something tragic happens, and Ellie's obviously is the survivor. Presumably something happens to this girl, Dina, and Ellie now is sort of all out for revenge. That seems to be the premise of the next game. It's just focused on revenge and sort of like a payback story. So when they released the trailer, they let the press actually play 2 to 4 hours of the game itself. There were 2 separate demos, where demo 1 was located in Jackson, Wyoming, where the city that they live in is. It was like a snowy environment. The visuals are amazing. So much so it's like you can see like she and her friend are riding on horseback in the snowy mountains in Wyoming, and it just looks like a postcard, like out of reality, when they're riding the horses and they hit like a snowy fir tree, and like the fir just kind of moves a little and the snow drops, and it's just like real. It's so amazing. They put a lot of focus on the development of the visuals. The second demo was located in the suburbs of Seattle, where there's like sort of a warmer grassy environment, and it sort of focuses on the stealth aspect of the gameplay, showing Ellie sneaking around these enemies who are out, looking for her. My initial impressions from what the consensus of all the gameplay footage that I've seen on YouTube is that it looks very story driven, very linear focused gameplay versus all of the other games that seem to be out there, like the open world environments where you just can go do anything you want. A lot of people are, like that sort of gameplay. I am a big fan of linear story progression. Kind of like, I want to be told a story. I love being in that story and I like interacting with that story, but I want that story to be told. There's some people who would say that it's better to craft your own story. Like, Skyrim is one of those games where you could do anything you really want and create a story of your own, which is great, but that's not really what I'm looking for in a game. So that's why I'm really excited about this particular franchise and where it's going, because it's sticking to a formula that seems to work for it. The gameplay itself doesn't seem to be much different at all. A lot of people have said that it's basically just a continuation of the first game. It's evident in the control schemes, the movement, the on-screen HUD, which is very minimalistic to nothing like the original. The only thing that seems to be different in the respects of the game visually are like the graphics and the dynamic effects have been bumped up to the next level, like I was talking about the snow and the horse riding and all that. The AI in the game seems to be much smarter and more challenging than the first game, which is an obvious progression, in a game series. The NPCs all seem to have names and interconnected relationships with each other. Like while you're sneaking around, you'll hear them talking to each other, and they all have specific stories. And these are just the NPCs, like not even like the people that are playing like alongside the character. They've introduced a new enemy type, which are dogs that the NPCs have with them that are used to track you down and attack you, which wasn't in the first game, and adds even more of like a dynamic aspect to the combat and gameplay and the stealth mechanic, because now dogs they find your scent and they can like follow you around in the map, where that never was in the game before. So you really have to think on a different level while you're playing and evading enemies, that you're not totally safe to just sit and kind of wait something out, because those dogs are going to find you.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty intense. So the other things that seem to be the same are crafting in the game. Seems pretty much the same, where you can take elements of what you find in the environment and you craft health kits and weapons. The visuals for the crafting portion have been bumped up a little to give it a little extra flair, but it's still basically the same functionality, which I like. So this game is going to feel very familiar to you if you played The Last of Us, the first one. Overall, the infected enemies, like the zombie type ones, most of the people think that they feel less of a threat, because now the shock value of those creatures has kind of diminished, because now you kind of know what to expect. There are new infected enemy types, but overall it's like the human enemies are the more dangerous and the more scary, sort of a la that whole Walking Dead dynamic where if you ever watch the show, at the beginning, the zombies were really the threat, but as the series goes on, they're very predictable. You can avoid them, you can take them out, but it's like the humans that get all crazy and scary, and you don't know what's going to happen and what their motivations are.
I was reading about this too, that they based the concept of the virus that this video game, kind of attaches to the zombie-like creatures. They sort of based it on this real-life fungus called cordyceps.
Yeah.
That sort of like grabs it. It typically attacks insects or something like that, but it totally controls them. It's pretty creepy stuff.
Oh yeah, I was just watching it actually this morning, doing prep for the show, where the original game, they were talking about that, and they had actual video of like ant colonies that have been infected by the cordyceps, and it's like real life.
It's horrifying
stuff where like you see like the zombified ants like acting all crazy and doing stuff, and then they like die, and then the sprouts come out of the body and they spread spores that infect the rest of the ants. It's like, dude, if that jumped to humanity, we're so fucked. Like we're done. It's so crazy.
My oldest son, him and his buddies from Boy Scouts, they listening to their conversations, sometimes I get a little nervous because they talk about how there's all these survival, based video games coming out to train the young adolescents how to survive for the upcoming climate collapse and breakdown of human civility and
nice
and the way that they describe it. It's terrifying because, I'm sitting there thinking to myself, like, oh, my God, yeah, I can totally see that happening. This is awful. Like, you guys are right on. You're predicting the future here. And, I just, if you want to survive the zombie apocalypse, you just got to surround yourself with as many gamers as possible.
Oh, yeah.
Because they know what they're doing.
They know how to survive in that environment. It is scary to think about. All right, so one of the things I took away from my research is that the story seems to be the main focus of the developers because, it's evident because of the fact that the gameplay itself seems very much the same. So they were able to really narrow their focus on story development, dialogue, voice acting, which the voice acting and the motion capture acting of the first game was top notch. It just seems to go even to the next level in the next game. The actors are just phenomenal. One of the things I'm interested to see is the dynamic between Joel and Ellie in the second game, because it ends in the first game where, again, spoiler drops, Ellie was going to be sacrificed by this militia group, the Fireflies, because she had built an immunity, or she had an immunity to the virus or to the fungus, but they had to kill her in order to,
extract it
and create like a cure.
Serum.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But Joel was not having that at all, and he fucking rips through the hospital to get her and save her, like basically killing everyone in his path. And he's like, fuck humanity, screw that, I am saving this girl. Like, and in the beginning, he didn't want to have anything to do with her, obviously, like sort of like a denial of having feelings for anyone after what happened to his daughter back, 20 years previously. But you can obviously see that he's kind of taken her on as a surrogate daughter. But in the beginning of the trailer and through the gameplay, Joel is nowhere to be found at all. It's just Ellie. And you would think, what the hell happened? Like, one of the things at the end of the game, the first one, was that he lied to her and said that since she was comatose through the whole event, that she didn't know why they had left and like what happened and why didn't they, what was supposed to go down. And he says that, oh, yeah, they had a whole bunch of people like you with an immunity and they couldn't create a cure, so they just didn't need you. And she's like, oh, okay, that's weird. And at the very end of the game, she's like getting kind of like emotional because they reach Jackson City and they're safe. And she's just like, I don't understand what's going on. What happened with this whole thing? And I just need to know that you're telling me the truth. about what happened. And he's like, yeah, that's how it did. That's how it went down. So he's totally lying to her about what happened at the end of the game. So I'm wondering if that sort of came out in between the time and that they're sort of estranged at the beginning of the game.
Yeah.
Although he does show up at the end of the trailer, the release trailer, and like he's sort of like saying, I'm not going to let you do this alone. So he does come back at some point. But I'm just curious to see why they weren't like friends or together at the beginning. So I find that stuff interesting. And I love that Naughty Dog has decided to double down on the linear story game formula, so that, you know, it's not about a new fancy way to play the game. It's not about this multiplayer aspect that they didn't have in the first game. All they did is have multiplayer, but it's just about the characters and the story, and that's the games that I love.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think I veer away slightly. We may differ there. I don't mind those games. I'm definitely more drawn to the open world concept, like Fallout. That's definitely one of my favorite games of all time. Is the Fallout 3 and Fallout 4. I gave those games quite a few hours of my life. I did play The Last of Us. I didn't finish it, and I was really glad when you chose to have this one be one of the first ones, because I coincidentally, like maybe 2 weeks prior to you mentioning it was your choice for the first episode, I was like, you know what, I have to play that game, because everyone has gone on and on about how much they loved it and how good the story was, and I just didn't give it its full chance. I played it for a little bit, and I was like, okay, this seems more of like I'm just following a story along. You have your gameplay where you try to solve each individual encounter that you come to, but I was and I did enjoy that part of it. I mean, the stealth aspect of it was really, I don't know, uniquely handled, I thought, and I was liking it, but I got this aversion to cutscenes in video games. I have a lot of, like, I just sort of get impatient. I'm like, and I think it's because of how I compartmentalize different forms of entertainment. Like with video games, I'm like, I want to be playing the game, not watching somebody, which is sort of weird because I love movies so much. You think that I would just soak right into it and consume it like I consume a movie. But I approach the two different types of entertainment very differently. And I tend to like, high action video games and that sort of thing. And not always first person shooters, but that's definitely, that has some appeal too. Like I really did like, it got a lot of crap, but I really liked the Battlefront, not the newest one, but the re-release of Battlefront.
The Star Wars one?
Yeah. I really did like that. The new one I had all kinds of problems with and didn't like it as much as the one that preceded it, which seems to be an opinion that is flopped out there. I mean, do you find that people are more, the big thing with the, what do they call them? The
loot boxes.
Thank you. Yeah, the loot box issue.
Yeah, it seems to be like the majority of what I've researched and seen and experienced with the new Battlefront games like Star Wars is this total aversion to loot boxes, and it justifiably so in my eyes, especially when loot boxes impact gameplay and they're not just aesthetics.
Right.
There are certain loot boxes where, like, hey, if you put in like $5 to get 1,000 in-game credit, you can get this box which contains 5 skins that you can custom color your character or your ship. And all right, that's one thing. But if it's like, hey, you put in $10 and you get this loot crate that may or may not have a high impact pulse rifle that's going to kick ass in the game, but it might just have skins instead. Again, you get into this whole other aspect of, is that gambling? Is that, but just the fact that I can put in extra money and kick your ass because I had my extra money to put into the game is total bullshit.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do not enjoy the idea of games with loot boxes in general.
I agree 100%.
And that's one of the things that Battlefront had latched on early, just to kind of like squeeze every penny out of the player.
Right.
I'm old school. Hey, you pay one price for a video game. That game is complete. Everything is contained in it. and you play it, and end of story.
Yeah. Yep.
I agree, especially as a parent. It just, your relationship with your children is better without those, without that constant. Hey, Dad, could I listen? If you just let me charge $5 more because like it adds up. I was there years back and had to put an end to it.
Right, a $60 game ends up becoming a $160 game.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and the thing is that after a select amount of time, it's like there's they spent $160 and that the value's gone now because they've moved on to the next game and to the next loot box, and it just drives you up a wall. And it definitely does seem to if it's a competitive online game too, it's
like
it's no
Fortnite.
fun. It's I mean, dying every 2 minutes because somebody else was throwing a ton of money into it is like, it's just, where's the fun in that?
Right, there is no. So just to use that to cement my final thoughts on Last of Us 2 that's coming out is I'm totally of the mind of if it's not broken, don't fix it, and I think that's what Naughty Dog is doing with this game. So,
yeah. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So that's I'll end that rant right there. So why don't we go on to movies? We've been looking forward to Derek's take on Ad Astra.
Yeah. I when we were planning for the podcast, I was originally thinking about sort of reviewing my favorite pick of the year so far, which is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. There's a lot to talk about there because it's a Quentin Tarantino movie, and the movie itself has lots of things that we can talk about. But I ultimately decided on Ad Astra just because it's a little more current, and it also seemed to really fit with the dad theme that we have been sort of like following for this episode, which I thought was kind of appropriate considering the name of the podcast and the other topics. I mean, for the music, it's Willie Nelson and his son Lukas, and Last of Us features a really prominent, guardianship style father-daughter relationship. And Ad Astra is really this father-son movie set in gigantic proportions. The name of the movie, Ad Astra, means to the stars, and that's where it's obviously, 90% of the movie. It seems like 90% of it's set in space, which I imagine was an amazing challenge for director James Gray to tackle. I've listened to some of his interviews since making it, and he basically confirmed that he knew it was going to be difficult, but it certainly turned out to be a lot more difficult than he expected. But the film itself is about an astronaut named Roy McBride, who's played by Brad Pitt, who's commissioned to travel into the far reaches of the solar system to kind of see if he can discover the cause of a life-threatening pulse-like wave of dark matter or antimatter that's emanating from somewhere around the planet Neptune. And the journey sort of layers on one more interesting wrinkle. The location of the power surge is also where Roy's famous astronaut father was thought to have disappeared 16 years prior on a mission that was called the Lima Project. And its purpose was to discover if there was other life out there in the galaxy. And it becomes clear to Roy rather quickly in the movie that the government believes that his father, Cliff McBride, who's played by Tommy Lee Jones, and was, the character is presumed dead. It's discovered that the government believes that he is not only still alive, but is likely the cause of the deadly pulse wave threatening all life in the solar system. So the movie sort of follows Roy's, sort of indoctrination into the mission. And then he goes off on this quest that leads him first to the moon. Then the next stage is he's supposed to get kind of like a boosted rocket ride from there to Mars. And then from Mars, that's where they're hoping they're going to be able to sort of send a signal that will be received by Roy's father. And if that signal is received and they end up communicating, they're basically kind of hoping that Roy is going to function as bait and get his father to respond so they can pinpoint his exact location and then launch like a follow-up mission to that, and would be treading pretty heavily onto spoiler territory there. So I don't want to go too much into it, but I really feel like this movie's its strength is Brad Pitt's awesome and understated performance. He's kind of watching Pitt's career. It's really been an amazing career to watch. I mean, he starts off in the industry as sort of like this, incredibly good-looking, pretty boy. I think one of his first roles was like Thelma and Louise, and he sort of like rides that wave initially, but he appears in a couple of really cool movies where he veers away from that. I don't know if you guys have seen the movie California, but he sort of dirties himself up pretty heavy for that role, and of course,
one of my. I'm sorry, but it just popped into my head. But one of my favorite all-time lines is "Put your titty away, Adele."
yeah, that movie's great. And of course, it's like the really small role he had in the movie True Romance, where he plays Floyd. Everyone loves that character. Kind of like this stoner. But yeah, but his career, like, it's just been really, really great. And I feel like he's at the point in his life where he's able to, take great chances. He's obviously like become an important producer in Hollywood now. But I mean, his role in Seven was amazing, but I actually think his all-time best role was the movie Moneyball, where that's where you get to see him really, really carry a movie almost entirely. I mean, he's in 90% of the scenes in that movie, and he just does an amazing job. And here in Ad Astra, he takes this really understated method to playing this character, and I thought it was great. I mean, the movie itself definitely. It's almost like this giant metaphor for bad dads and what a bad dad effect can have on children, and and how children will often sort of almost pursue the idea of their father, like what they've built him up to be in their mind, and how sometimes the reality will not match that. In this movie, it's definitely a giant metaphor for that idea set in this galactic scale, Now, Sean, you said you saw this, right?
Yeah, and listening to you talk about it makes me feel bad because I sort of like, my first impression was, I'm not sure if I like it or appreciate it, because I didn't not like it, but I don't know if I just missed something. And one of the things that I did latch onto was the fact that I thought that Brad Pitt performance was bad. Like, and maybe it was just because it was so good, because his character was just so bland to me. Like, even the fact that like his character is able to keep his heart rate below 89 beats per minute when there's like a catastrophe happening. It's like he was playing a robot. And like, I don't know if that's the point, but to me, he just seemed like this boring, dull character.
I read it as the point. I mean, they have those things they keep returning to throughout it, where he's sort of like, the computer sort of tests his mood, and he makes a comment at one point in there where he's just gotten really good at suppressing his emotions. But I almost think that there's a way of looking at it where it's not just that he's willfully suppressing his emotions. He's actually been sort of damaged by the abandonment of his father, which again, I think plays to the larger theme of children that have sort of, suffered through any kind of bad parenting or it doesn't even have to be overtly bad, just that sort of like abandonment, like, fathers who sort of pursued something else in life, looking for fulfillment outside of their family to an extreme that it actually causes, a lot of damage in the family itself.
Right.
And it was kind of nice to have this. My son and I, he's all, I mean, like usual, and children sort of wind up liking a lot of the things that their parents like. Obviously, my love of film has sort of begun to seep into his life.
That's awesome.
So we have little things that we like, little rituals that we do. So I often check a lot of like movie trailer sites, and when we go to bed at night, I often read to him from an iPad. So I'll be like, let's see if any new trailers came out. And this was one that we saw the trailer for, and he seemed really interested in it. Kids like, young boys in particular love the idea of space and all that sort of thing. So we watched the trailers and kind of followed it up to its release. And I ended up going with him and my wife to see this movie. And I was a little worried in the middle of it that its slowness and occasional dryness even might not sit well with him. But he really liked it, which I loved. And at the end, I was like, "So what'd you think of it, buddy?" I'm like, "I thought you might be kind of bored with a lot of the like, how some of the scenes were really, really talky." And he's like, "No, I like that. I like listening to people talk." So it was kind of cool to have him get it, even though I think the larger, themes of father-son abandonment might have been lost on him. He was more interested in maybe some of the action scenes that arose throughout it.
I'm glad you bring that up because. Oh, go ahead, Kristian.
I was just going to throw in my 2 cents as far as being able to relate to the father-son film experience. When I remember getting a phone call from my son Billy's teacher saying, Mr. Peterson, Williams, he's just seemed really, really down for the last week. And I was like, oh yeah, last Friday we saw Avengers Infinity War, and and the teacher was like, oh, and I'm like, yeah, I'm like, no offense. I'm like, I said, yeah, my friends have been telling me too that I just seem a little like, what just happened? Huh? And I'm like, Spider-Man's dead? Are you kidding me?
Spoiler alert.
Yeah. But it's funny how, I just think it's a way I never, I remember bonding with my dad over a Creature double feature when I was a kid. I couldn't wait to make Jiffy Pop and watch Godzilla beat the bejesus out of Mothra
right.
with Pa. It was cool. So it's nice to be able to have that with your kids and to know that they appreciate it is even so much cooler.
Yeah. Those connections are really, really meaningful, and they might even make the movie sometimes seem more important in my own mind than maybe it really was, but yeah, I loved those themes in this movie. And it's I was like doing some research on the film and just trying to like get a couple of like interesting details. And again, this is like, I feel weird about these kind of conversations because I feel like I'm spoiling stuff. So again, if you don't want this sort of stuff spoiled, I gotta, the next thing but I gotta talk about it because I feel like I feel like it was the greatest scene in the movie is when he finally arrives at, this ship off of Neptune in the end and sort of encounters his father. And I don't know, like Tommy Lee Jones's reaction to seeing his son, actually, it startled me the way he almost casually dismisses him. I mean, did you feel that too, Sean, when he's looking up at him through that glass floor?
Yeah, and I think that also kind of was another, it's probably intentional. It's obviously intentional because they're acting it, but it was very off-putting. And it's sort of like, I thought that they were trying to nail like a wooden block into a round hole with this sort of idea of the cautionary tale. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, where the father loses sight of what's truly important in his life due to his obsession,
right.
Like where the alien life is, and I'm sorry, getting into spoiler territory here, but like the search for alien life is his white whale, and to the detriment of everything, even like his closest personal relationships with his family. And that's where I was like, oh, and you're even overdoing it now where it's like, oh, it's like 5 billion miles or however many billion miles away from Earth, and there's my son. It's like, oh, what's up?
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, I mean, like, I that's where I think I was maybe like lost in the metaphor there. I'm like, I just really picture like, I know a lot of people in life that have had really crappy parents, and, a lot of times when you sort of finally catch up with that person who abandoned you, and you have all these hopes in your mind on how they're going to view you, and then you get slammed with reality where they're like, no, they are just as shitty as everybody always said they are. And so I thought there was maybe a little bit of a thing going on there. But about that scene too, in my research, there was a cool thing I came across where apparently I was really moved by the shot where Brad Pitt is looking up at him. Again, even the staging of that scene is important. Like, you know, the son is down below, the father is up above on his platform, and he's looking up at him and making this plea for connection. And then it's just sort of like slaps his hand away. You know, he's like, I don't want your connection. Like I fled from Earth because you basically meant nothing to me, you know, and I'm pursuing my dream, which was outside of the family unit. And this great shot of a single tear coming out of Brad Pitt's. It's so awesome because his expression hardly changes, but you get this sense of the depth of the sadness in his face and that lone tear that goes down the side of his face. And what's cool is I came across a thing from James Gray. I guess Brad Pitt, when after the scene had been shot, he mentioned to the director, like, yeah, I mean, you're obviously going to have to edit that because that's not how a tear would function in space and zero gravity or whatever. And James Gray was like, I guess his quote was, I'm sorry, I'm keeping it. That acting's too good, buddy, or something like that. Which I'm glad he did, because I was like, man. Although it's weird though, because I don't think, were they in zero gravity at that point? I don't think they were, so I don't know how much that connects.
I think it had to have been implied, just because they never do anything in any of the other shots of in space travel where it's like, all right, enable anti-gravity units now, you know, and they're just standing there. It's always implied that in space they're always in zero G. So
yeah. And that's another thing that sort of like lands on this movie, the criticism that some people had about, like, you know, this or that space thing not being proper to how it would be. You know, the fact that he spends practically a year in space, he'd come back and he'd be like a bag of jelly when they pull him out, you know, like, but, you know, it's supposed to be the not too distant future. And I'm totally able to suspend my disbelief that there's certain technologies. I mean, he was talking about maybe the idea of, like, at that point, there could be some pill that, like, strengthens your cellular body to resist certain things.
Or like the electrodes with the electromuscle stimulus that was going on.
Exactly. Yeah, so things like that in movies don't often pull me out of it, but that's me.
There's a couple of cool connecting things, too, with that. You know, I haven't seen the movie yet, but I do know that a father-son movie, you know, especially with Brad Pitt, he may have been, you know, that might have been an art imitating life moment too, because I know that he's been going through this nasty divorce too, and you know, fighting to remain in his kids' lives as well. I mean, so that father-son bond is probably very strong in him, and that probably was that art imitating life moment too, perhaps when he's looking up at his dad, you know, looking up at Tommy Lee Jones, and
definitely
having that
channeling
moment,
those emotions would help his acting at that point.
True, although we can't discount that he might also, I agree with you, I think he did probably pick this project based on that. But interestingly, and stepping back from it, I mean, my initial instinct is that he would think of himself as the son, but it's also possible that he thinks of himself as the father. You know, like he may even view himself as, I mean, again, I might be reading too much into it there, but or, you know, I mean, the reality of it is he probably sees a connectivity with both characters. But yeah, I definitely recommend the movie to people. It's something you should probably see. It unfortunately, I think, didn't do quite as well in the box office as they had hoped, and but you know, whatever a movie doesn't make up at the box office, I think it ends up making up for it later on streaming and video and all that.
My last thing I wanted to bring up with you, Derek, about that movie, I felt after the fact that they were really pushing a lot of religious overtones, and maybe I was just reading into things, but like the tower at the beginning, and he falls off the tower like a fall from grace. I was like, ugh. Beat me over the head with a religious overtone there.
Yeah, I don't know that I picked it up then, but
and then like the sins of the father, he literally says the sins of the father are passed to his son, and like that, I think it was near the Neptune scene, and like he says it in his inner monologue. And then also the fact that they're pushing the science that there's no other life in the universe. It's just us.
Yeah. That's it was an interesting take on that, and but again, I think that all just plays into the metaphors and the themes that, like, the idea of this father leaving everything that he should have paid most attention to in life, which where he should have put his attention and his love. He ended up sort of like chasing down this ghost of an idea at the expense of everything that he's left behind. So while not a very it's a bit of a nihilistic view that we're the only thing out there, and the movie does seem to take that standpoint at the end. Again, I think it's less about the literal nature of that statement and more about it being fitting the metaphor of, like, hey, pay attention to the things that are tangible and around you and that you love. Pursue your dreams, of course, but like not at the expense of those who you should love most or who love you most.
Right. What would you rate this out of 1 to 10? 10 being great, 1 being not.
Let's see. I'd probably let me put it on a 5-star, because I think that will kind of.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd land this movie in like a 3.5 for me. Maybe not quite a 4-star movie for me is something that I would love to rewatch again and again and again. While I got a lot out of this movie, I'm not sure it attains that level of rewatchability. And 5 stars for me are like the best movies of all time. Right,
the movie unicorn.
Yeah, exactly. Start at The Empire Strikes Back and Jaws and The Godfather and that type of thing.
This is like a 1.5 or 2 for me.
Wow. Okay. Wow. All right.
I just didn't really come across. It didn't come across the way it probably was meant, and I'm probably just coming at it from a layman's movie point of view, where I'm just like, he's boring.
Yeah. Gotcha.
But anyway, hopefully we weren't boring. I think that's a good point to start to wrap things up. Any final thoughts on anything that we've hit on today, guys?
I think we covered it.
I think it was great. I think the chemistry was pretty good. I enjoyed both of you guys' segment. I thought it was very informative as well as entertaining.
Nice.
I would have dropped the F-bomb more. I mean, you said it a couple of times, and I was just like, man, I don't know if we're allowed to say it. I don't want to be the first one to do it.
Right.
And then you threw it out there, but it was too late for me at that point. So I think
it's late in the episode, but let's just say this might not be appropriate for work or for children. Maybe I should cut that and put it at the beginning of the podcast. But.
There you go.
So, next week, I'm gonna review the year in porn next week.
Nice. So. All the graphic detail. Let's look forward to that. So, anything upcoming that you guys want to plug for your own personal endeavors?
Well, if this gets out before October 14th, I am playing at the Lost Dog in Dennis, Mass. It's a Dogtoberfest. And December 13th, I am performing with my band and supporting act Ashley Jordan, who has won Best Country Music, the Best Country Artist in the Boston Music Awards for the last 2 years. It's my CD release party. I'll hopefully have my record done by then.
Make sure if you have any links given to me, I'll put them in the show descriptions.
All right, fantastic.
How about you, Derek?
Maybe something that's just sort of maybe interesting to everybody. Obviously, the Battleground locations each have events every single week. They're always well attended. If you're like a fan of role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons in particular, or anything like that, our Wednesday night in-store gaming is incredibly popular. It's 60 to 70 people all at different tables in the store, all playing it. That's something you should check out. But a little more broadly interesting is it's the first weekend in November. I want to say the dates the 2nd and the 3rd. Maybe I'll clarify that in a future episode we do. We do this Extra Life gaming marathon. It's a 24-hour in-store gaming marathon. We go from noon on Saturday to noon on Sunday, and it's just it's a totally free event, but we do raffles all night long, and all of the money that we raise goes towards the Extra Life charity, and we usually choose the Children's Miracle Fund to donate all the money.
Nice.
It's usually a couple of $1,000s. So if you're interested in games in any way, you don't have to have had any experience in anything. You can show up that weekend and just join the crowd. It's a great group of people. We do raffles all night long. So keep that in mind for early November.
Awesome. And again, I'll take any links that you have that are relevant, and I'll post them in the show description.
Sounds good.
For me personally, there's really nothing going on like externally. I'm still in the midst of development for our game, which hopefully should be releasing towards the end of the year, beginning of 2020. It's Future Tech Space Combat Academy. I had premiered some gameplay at PAX East like about a year or two ago. Derek, you were there. Your son got to play a little bit, right?
That's right, yep.
And that's just about ready to premiere the alpha for some gameplay demos. But it's still in development, so I'll just keep everyone informed of how it's going and give links in the show descriptions.
Awesome.
So I want to thank you guys. That was I'm pretty psyched for the first episode. I think it worked pretty good. And thank you for listening and joining us. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take it easy.
Also, I'd like to remind you to please like, follow, and subscribe to our social media links and to subscribe to our podcast.